song this time.
Yeah.
It's funny. That's our introduction.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. So the date is, I actually have no idea, but it's sometime in November. I think it's the 26th.
26th.
26th. And I have the honour of sitting with Rob, who I will let introduce himself in a moment, but just to say thank you very much for creating this space and being part of this pilgrimage that I'm on and we are on. So what would be very interesting to start with is to hear a bit about your story, about how you came to be here and holding the spaces that you do and the work you do.
Okay. So we started with a little piece of music, and I would say that that's been a big part of what's eventually led me to be leading vision quests, youth initiations, etc. The early part of my adulthood, I look back now and I think I was really searching to know who I was, traveling many parts of the world, really going deep into music, but really I was looking to go deep into myself. When I look back now, I can see that. Back then I used to think I was doing it all for the music. Now I look back and I realize that the music was the means by which I was learning about myself and learning my tools. Now I look back at my career as a musician and I can see how that was my access point to, they say getting your 10,000 hours, like being able to do the hours to move towards really going deep into a subject or mastery of a subject. So music was definitely the access point, understanding about harmony, yes, there's a harmony between notes, but how do people harmonize with each other? How do we harmonize with a place? Understanding about rhythm and the rhythms inside ourselves. How do we bring a group of people into rhythm? Understanding social dynamics, how do we read an audience and know which is the right song? Which is the right song for the right moment? Understanding about feeling. How do we either say the thing, be in the place of, play the song that brings the feeling of the collective together in a good way. So, yeah, music was a big part of my journey. The practicalities often, like playing the saxophone and flute and playing with different bands and whatnot, having my own band, traveling here or there, making CDs, etc., etc. But the real thing was the way it was growing me growing me as an individual, as a rite of passage guide. I look back and I can see, I was looking to answer that question that all adolescents have to answer, which is, who am I? Yeah, and so by the time I was in my, early 30s, 33, 34, I had answered that enough that I was willing to turn toward the collectives. Then I was willing to think about marriage and think about children and have children, have a child, and that was a big change. I feel like up to 34, like I lived. Back then I say, well, if I died now it would be okay. I've done a lot of things that many people dream of doing, and I dreamed of doing, and I've done them. But I think now I can really see how that was, in a lot of ways, the end of my adolescence. Because my generation, we grew up the fastest, and we got to being an adult the fastest, but we really grew up the slowest in a certain way. We didn't really grow up. And a lot of people my age, that were born in the mid-60s, early 70s, we wanted to grow up fast, but then we didn't really want to be on our own. Yeah. So I can see I went through, now I look back and I'm like, yeah, I died to my youth, and turned into a person of community and went from being an I into being a we. And that a lot of the focus was on family. And eventually, I was a wildcrafter for many years, and even now still do some wildcrafting, which is harvesting medicinal plants, harvesting edible mushrooms, being deeply in nature, being deeply in connection with the land. And for me, that's been really important. One of the things I love about wildcrafting is I feel like I'm in connection with traditional people all over the world who walk out from their home and walk into the forest or walk out into the bush and get medicine and get food and get wood. So it's a way that I stay in connection with those things, with my basic survival needs, and help provide that for other people. Yeah, that's pretty huge for me, actually. And I like to be able to do that in a good social context also. I love best working together with a few people. I love being on the mountainside and harvesting St. John's wort flowers. One after the other, Working together with people. It feels really good to me. So a lot of those things eventually led me to, at a certain point, I was getting older. So by 47, 48, I just started asking, like, okay, what am I going to do with this life? Because I can see it's going to end soon enough. And I was already leading vision quests at that time. I had already been leading for a few years. But in 2014, so really fairly recently, it was in 2014 where I really bottomed out in my life. And that's I think this part really matters. It's like bottoming out to the place of like, I'm going to die, like my inner candle's going to go out, or I'm going to turn this life around and do something. So, yeah, it was at that point I had decided, I need to be doing the things that I'm really brilliant at. I need to be doing the things that I uniquely can do. And there are other people who are good wildcrafters. I was an excellent wildcrafter, but there's very few people that can lead a youth initiation or that can lead a vision quest in a good way. There are some, but we're not a lot. So that's where I really started seeing, something I need to do the things that bring together my gifts, like I was talking about earlier, from music, and put that so that I'm living in my genius, so that I'm living in my brilliance. And I believe that that's what encourages others to be living in their brilliance. Yeah. So yeah, I made a really strong commitment at that point. I just started I had a little saying on my office desk, like, okay, what are the things that I uniquely can do? And let me start letting go of the rest and stop thinking that I need to do everything in my life. Let me do the things that I can do best and leave as a contribution once I'm gone. Well, that's the long answer of my the long answer of my story.
And it's the true answer in the sense that, the more you do this work, the more you're completely encompassing it, embodying it. Not just how you read the land and collect with gratitude and ask permission, but you're also encouraging young people to step into the whole of themselves. You can't help but be mirrored by that. You are being asked to do the same, and you heard the call more and more, and it's beautiful. I mean, the work moves you. It can't not, but it maybe can for some people, and that's why maybe you said there's some people who can't hold these kind of processes, and it's those that can stand in the weathers of it that therefore should be the ones there to hold that space. So I hear that. You mentioned rites of passage a few times. It would be really wonderful to hear from you and your experience, your heart, if you bring intellect into it if you want to, but what does it mean to you, the term rite of passage?
For me, a rite of passage is that ceremony, that specific event that marks a change from one part of life to the next, or one role or status in life to the next. So yeah, that is, like, that's how I define it. But what does rites of passage mean to me? For me, being involved in rites of passage is a real humbling, and it's a real gift. it's a place where I can really let go of my ego, because I know that doesn't really have a place there. It's, in a lot of ways, it's like birth, you know, when you're at a birth, when a baby's being born, like we're standing at this really precious, super extra human moment when they're at the portal to spirit is open. Just like when a person dies, when a person's born, like that portal to spirit is open. So, in a created way, and then not in rites of passage, we get to be at that place again for other people as they make those transitions in life. And I'm lucky I get to play that role as best I can. I mean, in a sense, sometimes I like to think I'm not really doing anything, but like I'm doing something. It's like I'm setting up something for magic to happen. Yeah. It's kind of like that. Yeah. Like I get to set up the space for. What's that?
It's that loose holding the whole time we're talking about. It's like there has to be a holding in some ways for people to lean up against and know. But really it's not, it's the stuff in between that is the magic. And that it doesn't necessarily belong to anybody. But the holding, the way that you set it up is absolutely vital to that entrance in.
Yeah. Yeah, and I believe in that a lot, that the way that we set it up, and I think set it up strongly so that people feel safe, because that's a huge thing, is that people need to feel safe. A lot of times, I mean, often people aren't used to traveling in these kinds of realms. So if I let them, you know, if they know they're buckled in a good way, then they feel safe to be able to go on the journey that they need to. So that is actually really, really important to me. Being able to do that in a way that's also generous. That's generous to who they are. That gives them space for themselves to grow, to unfold. That feels important. So I would say for me, it's like a generous holding. The skeleton should be strong, but a generous holding for their flesh and their fat and their organs to fill it out.
How do you deal with the other part of that, which is the kind of the health and safety, the cotton wooling aspect of our society, which fears risk and letting young people step over into the unknown? How do you bring that into managing that generous holding?
I think of being a parent. I'm a strong believer in like calm, confident, competent, authoritative, different than authoritarian parenting. I think like a child needs to know where you're going and what you're doing. It's okay to let them know. And as they get older, they're ready to take steps. That's how they learn to take steps on their own. And I think of especially with working with youth and helping youth's parents, because they're the ones who need to feel. The youths want to take a risk. They want to go out there and push themselves. It's the parents that actually need the help. The parents who need to let go. It's the parents who need to know, like, yeah, actually it's a little dangerous out there. They actually might get hurt while they're out there. We're going to do the best we can to have a safe environment for them. But they need to go take risks. They need to feel the edge of fear. And if they don't do it with us, they're going to go out and do it somewhere else. And it's probably going to be a lot more dangerous than what they're going to do with us. Yeah.
So in terms of rite of passage and marking that threshold, is there any necessary aspects within a rite of passage to even call it a rite of passage? What makes the difference between a nature experience versus a rites of passage experience?
Well, one is there's intentionality. There's an intention. And then there's some practical pieces that have to be in place consciously. So there's consciously, setting up the three main parts of the rite of passage, that they're leaving something behind, that they're in a place in between the worlds, and that they are stepping into something new that they have to bring into their community. So there's, intentionally setting up those three different places. Something that I think is really key with the rite of passage is that they have to feel their mortality. So there has to be a challenge piece that whether they could actually die from it or not, they have to feel and fear that they could die from it. That's really important. So we set that up as being alone in wild nature for 48 hours without food, without an indoor shelter. Usually for most young people that's enough for them to feel the edge of like, oh, this is for real. You know. So that piece is really huge, that they can feel their mortality. Something else that let me see if I want to say anything else before I go into this next piece. Yeah, witness. That they have the witness of their people, they have the witness of community. That part is also really important for it to be effective. Like what I'm thinking when we design rites of passage, our youth initiations, is that it should be meaningful and effective. Okay, there are other things that are called rites of passage that are not necessarily meaningful, and there's others that are not necessarily effective. What I'm looking for is when that young person comes as a girl or as a boy and stands face to face with their parent and says their last words as a boy or as a girl and has to hear the last words from that parent and then cut their cord and we do a physical cord cutting ceremony where they make a cord of their childhood or a cord of their childhood and tie that with their mom, and they have to say those last words and of their power cut that cord. Of their own volition say, yes, I am mature enough, I'm old enough, I'm grown enough, and for them to cut that cord, as you can imagine, it's very emotional, hugely emotional, and it's effective, it's meaningful, and we make the effort to create meaning, not project meaning around it, but actually set up a scenario so that it can be meaningful. But apart. When they do that cord cutting ceremony, there's witness, there's elders there to see them, there's other family members there to see them. They have their guides who are helping them go through. They have their mentors who are there watching them. When our young people come back from their rite of passage as a young man, as a young woman, we have witness to acknowledge them, to see them, to receive them back, literally to receive them back, to hear their stories, and to let them see what's good and what's strong and what's powerful in their story. Because when they come back, it might just feel like, oh, well, I went out there. I did, it was no big thing. And they may not see how incredible what they've done. And then when they come back after their 9 days, they come back to the community, we have a big welcome home ceremony for them. There's usually 60, 70, 80, even up to 120 people will come just to hear half a dozen youth tell their story of growing up, of their rite of passage. And when they get that witness, when they get seen by elders, when they have older people, I'm amazed how many elders show up. I didn't expect that the first year we did this, and like 65 people came to our first welcome home, and there were 3 youth at it. 5 had gone through, but there were only 3 who were local. And 65 people came, and half of them were elders. And I started realizing that it's helping the elders grow up. That the elders showing up to witness the youth is actually helping the elders grow up so that they can pass on.
Yeah.
So anyway, back to witness. The witness piece is really huge. So yeah, it has to have something that brings them to the edge of mortality, and it has to have the witness of community. And with that, I was going to say that there are 3 components that I find are critical for a rite of passage to really be effective. And I would say this is true for any kind of deep healing to be effective, which is it has to involve nature, it has to involve community, and it has to involve spirit. All of those have to be there. Yeah, all those have to be there. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Yeah.
I want to skip a little bit just because you have mentioned a bit about your particular programs. So I think one of the things that I hear that appears very different to the programs that I know of is the ability to engage the parents beforehand and really set up with the young people a chance for them to think about their intention or to do even the program and therefore the severance before they've even started the program, which ultimately seems to me a much healthier way to do it, but is always a bit of a challenge in terms of just how you set up your program. So it would be really interesting to hear like how you set it up, even in its physical form, that enables that for families to come and for you to meet them. You know, what did you see that was needed, and how have you met that?
Right. Well, I'll start with saying even beforehand, we market to the parents, because this rite of passage is for the parents, actually. There's definitely challenges, but in the end, the parent will be the one coming up with at least some of the money. It's really helpful if the parents are on board. Have we had anyone come without parents? No. So part of it is having the parents on board, and we let the parents know this may be the last big decision you ever make for your child. Yeah. So, yeah, a lot of times, we talk to the parents beforehand. We want them on board. Then, as far as the actual rite of passage itself, I would wish to do more in the beginning, but we mostly, with the parents, we get it set up and we send them preparatory letters. We let them know, like, okay, you're going to have a cord cutting, be there. This is one of the most important times of your life. It's going to be like a wedding. It's like, this is your son, your daughter's rite of passage. This is a huge deal in their lives. We don't market it like a program. We let them know, like, yeah, there's money being exchanged here because that's what it takes for us to be able to run an organization and for us to be able to provide this. But the truth is, this is a major event in your life. Yeah, so I tell them, beforehand.
And is that just over the phone, or do you have meetings together as a
It
whole
totally depends
group?
on where they are and how it goes. We haven't found a formula. So sometimes it's a personal conversation. Sometimes we'll have had an informational session. Sometimes they'll have come. The best is when they come to a welcome home. When the parent or the youth comes to a welcome home, and they see these young people so on fire. They see their maturity. They hear them, say their name and say their claiming statement. Everyone has every youth who comes back has an I am statement that says, I am a young man or I'm a young woman who blank. They have a statement of who I am. So they've answered the question, who am I? And when they come back with that answer and people see that, like, I want that for my son or daughter. So that's the best when that can happen. It can be any of those things. I like to meet people in person beforehand. It doesn't always happen, but at least we have a phone conversation. That's essential. Yeah. And then there are times within the process that the parents, we really want them there. The biggest one is the cord cutting ceremony that I was telling you about. That's really critical. And we see a lot of healing happen there too. A lot of times divorced parents come together and have a good experience where they haven't had one in whoever knows how long.
Do you make the threads together on that day, together as a family?
Yeah, this all happens there's like about a 2.5-3 hour ceremony. So yeah, the youth make these cords together separately. They're told what's the point, what's the purpose of it. Think about your childhood memories. With each twist you make of the cord, put those childhood memories in this cord, and we do a little ceremony with the parents to help them, to prepare them to help let go of their son or daughter by letting go of the stories that they have about them.
And is that separate? Or do you do it in one big circle?
It's at the same location in two places. Yeah. So they're nearby each other, but they're doing their own separate processes with different people. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So being at the what we call the cord cutting ceremony, coming back 9 days later for what we call the return. And this is about 2.5 hours from here, so they have to make some effort. But again, we remind them this is one of the most important moments in your child's life. So a lot of times they come. They got to pick their kid up anyway, so they need someone needs to come and get them. Usually, or they go with someone else. I mean, it's not always that way. So there's the return, there's the welcome home ceremony.
The parents come to the return as well on the land to hear the initial story, do they?
No, they don't hear the story there.
Oh, I see.
They
just
but
come to pick
but
up.
they come to get them. But it's a huge. It's the completion. It's the completion of the rite of passage because they've gone out from their community. They go away for 9 days. They come back to their community, and it's the energetic moment when they cross there. There's actually a river. So when they cut the cord, go across the river, and they're gone. When they come back across the river, that's the energetic moment. It's the consecration of the rite of passage. That's the consecration of the rite of passage. When they come back together, it's a huge upwell of energy.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Do they say anything to each other, or is it very much body connecting?
It's all of that. Yeah, I mean, we definitely formally present them back. You know, I mean, at first they just want to come together. You know, it's one of those moments that's kind of like, it seems like it's in our bones and it's beyond words. Yeah, they want to be welcome. So at first they're physically welcomed back, and then there's a presentation ceremony, but they're actually the telling of their story. We counsel them and tell the parents also they may or may not wish to tell their story, but you'll definitely hear it 2 weeks from now at their welcome home. And it totally varies what they want to do. Some go home and they want to tell their story right away. Some, it's very personal and they need space. So yeah, we let the parents know beforehand. So and then at the very end of we have 9 months of mentorship after that time, and at the very end of that, we have an honoring ceremony again with the parents to formally mark the end of the mentorship period. Yeah, and that's also it's really sweet. They're, you know, by that time they are standing more firmly in their adulthood. The parents have been able to watch them change and grow.
Is there another I am statement? What are they stepping into? What are they being acknowledged for at that stage?
At that point, it's usually retrospective. How has this been? Who are you now? Yeah. Their I am statement, their claiming statement tends to stay the same. Occasionally someone brings a need to change this piece or that piece, but usually not. Usually most of the 9 months is actually them getting used to standing in it. They've gone through the challenge of their rite of passage. Okay, here I am as a young man, here I am as a young woman. My muscles get stronger. Let me get used to being this. Yeah.
It does take time. And I almost, I think many people would share this thought that sometimes the work that you're marking is both the work that you've been doing for a long time, but is also just an acknowledgement of the phase that you're stepping into. So stepping into adulthood or young adulthood is something that will just keep being worked at. But by you being seen in it and seeing it for yourself and letting the universe see what you're doing, it's like you're just making it clearer for the energy to keep flowing and not remain static in old patterns. But the work continues. And that's why what I also hear in your program is that the incorporation, and I know we spoke of this earlier, but that is a big part of it. And that is definitely something that I have witnessed time and time again, and I think this is shared across the board because we don't necessarily have the communities where rites of passage would have originally or traditionally been held in, that would have automatically given a constant buffering and reflection to what they had gone through. We're really bereft of that in rites of passage work. So, how have you managed to create this ongoing incorporation and community feel in the return?
Stick-to-itiveness. Yeah, tenacity. Tenacity is a big part of it. Holding the vision is a big part of it. Knowing that there needs to be a community to welcome the people back, and talking about it again and again and again and again, and just talking about how important it is. And now we're just starting to see that people they see it, they start to taste it, they start to understand. And we're just, 4 years, we've done our fourth young men's initiation. We've done our first young women's initiation this past summer. So we're starting to get a community of people who are understanding. But so I guess you could say education. I guess that's the talking about it a lot. Education is really important. Sticking with it is really important. Finding ways and creating opportunities for people to continue to come back together. So, for much of the year we have potlucks. We have potluck dinners. Keep bringing the people back together. Create other opportunities for people to come together. So that there's a consciousness towards cultural shift.
And you talk a lot about mentors and womentors. Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
Where do they get involved? Are they from the very beginning? How do you train or support those people taking on that role, on how to be a mentor?
Yeah. I want to bookmark that question because I want to say to you one other thing about how do we create this. There's an economic part of incorporation, and if we were to charge for everything we do, what we do would not be affordable. So there has to be a commitment to culture change. There has to be a commitment to things being different. There has to be a commitment to a world where rites of passage are normal and are a done thing. And at this time in my life, I'm willing to let go of me getting paid for everything I do, because I don't see that the economics of it would pencil out. But the importance of it happening is way bigger than money. I'm not taking any money with me when I'm gone. But if I can leave a world behind me where rites of passage are more a done thing, that's going to be worth way more than any money I ever could have made. So I think having the commitment myself and inspiring others to have that commitment and to prioritize our lives so that we have this essential piece of rites of passage back in place. Yeah, and I really believe our culture, the world, people, the other than human world needs it. Need us to grow up. We need to grow up. And I believe that that's what rites of passage offer. So, yeah, there's a piece of tenacity, but letting go of the economics so that our basic needs can get met, but that we just have to do this part. And maybe someday there will be a new economic model that'll work out. Commitment.
Yeah, that's
commitment.
I hear that, and I absolutely respect that part of it, because I think you're right. There is the moment that it's not about, it's not going to be a money thing, and although of course we all have to sustain ourselves, and that has to be part of it, and that's also about, rite of passage is also teaching yourself to stand in all of the cycles, which self-care is part of it. But we are, as a community, as a culture, slightly unbalanced with that language of self-care versus community care and the bigger the you, and so hearing that coming from you is very strong. So I honour that.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thank you. The economics of all this it's important. We got to figure it out. I know that if I'm going to do have more than one Vision Quest or Rite of Passage happen a year, I can afford to give one away, but I don't have a bankroll that's going to allow me to do what I'm doing. So there has to be enough. But yeah, I think there's a revaluing, reprioritization that has to happen. Yeah.
And where we get wealth from, many forms of wealth.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So you're asking about mentors. Mentors are easier to find than young people. There's lots of people who are looking for a way to give back. So we have, we have a call for mentors usually. It looks like an email. It looks like having an informational meeting, and we start preparing our mentors Ideally, it's 4 to 6 months beforehand. Usually around the turn of the year, we start running our rites of passage in June. By February, I like to know who our mentors are. Sometimes it's March, sometimes it's later. We're doing the best we can. Our women mentors, or womentors as they like to call themselves, they actually started, for our first Young Women's Rite of Passage, they started meeting 14 months before it happened, but they were very focused on wanting this to happen. It was incredibly important to them. It was inspiring to see how much the women came together to make this first Young Women's Rite of Passage happen. That was really something. But typically 4 or 5 months before, and then at the end of May, a month before the Young Men's Rite of Passage, a couple months before the Young Women's, we have a 4-day mentor training. So we have some meetings beforehand, we have some phone meetings. I can't say we found our formula that totally works, but having that mentor training is huge. That's the real like, okay, we're going from here. You know. Yeah, so we have a 4-day mentor training. I love it when mentors come back. You know, every year we lose some, we get some new ones. It's a big commitment to be a mentor, you know. But some people stay with it.
There's been quite an interesting debate around mentors. I know that John Young and others are kind of, is there another word for it, perhaps? But that aside, what is it that we are asking of our mentors? And in terms of training, you know, what is the space that we are wanting to envision and nourish for young people to step into, and how do we encourage us adults that maybe haven't had that experience themselves to step into that role? What are the qualities that you've seen are needed in work?
The qualities I've
for
seen.
Mentors, like, that you can bring into your, you know, mentorship training. What have you noticed in working that is absolutely essential in order to be a mentor?
Well, the biggest part is for them to live it, for them to grow up, for us as mentors to grow up and live our maturity, and to be authentic. So we do our own work, and we're authentic. We're honest about who we are, about where we are in our lives and in our process. You know, as far as qualifications, I strongly prefer that our mentors have done some kind of formal rite of passage. Occasionally they've gone through an informal rite of passage, like, you know, major accident, having died and come back to life. I've had a mentor who's been through that. He's changed from that experience. You know, we've had mentors who have done significant prison time. It changed them, and coming back from an experience like that and reclaiming their lives, huge. And that is a benefit to young people, to be able to hear those types of experiences. But doing a formal type of rite of passage also is really important. So whether they've vision quested with me or another organization, the Mankind Project is a big source of men for our mentors. It's not a nature-based program, but it is an initiatory growing up, maturation program. So those are things that I'm looking for. I'm looking for that they're able to the way I say it is live in their adult selves. If something happens that kind of affects their own wounding, if they're kind of re-stimulated or triggered, that they're able to keep a hold of themselves. That's really important, because working with young people who are in the time of their life where they're going through their wounding can be re-stimulating to mentors. And so mentors, you know, I'm really looking for that quality of, can this person keep a hold of themselves? And then deal with the way that they're triggered in an appropriate place with the other mentors, with the guides. That's actually really important.
That's really important, and I've certainly experienced and seen where that hasn't been held.
Yeah.
So in terms of your mentorship training, have you any advice on how, rather than just, or is it something you just talk about with a group, or is there any way of kind of role playing that, enabling that to kind of come to the forefront, so that can really be realised? Because it's easy to theorise that.
Sure.
different thing to experience it.
I could tell you some of what we do. First of all, during our mentor training, a lot of the mentor training is them going through the same processes that the youth are going to have to go through.
Right.
So every time they go through one of those processes, there's the possibility of something coming up, and then we deal with it right there. And then hopefully the person can kind of move through it, process through it. Our mentor training is extremely healing for our mentors. They get to do that cord cutting ceremony. The mentors get to have that cord cutting ceremony with their parents. We role play it, and it's super powerful. Many of our mentors tell me that was the most powerful part of the mentor training. They get to do some of the physical games that we do, because any physical game we do, any challenge we give them, it has a psychological growth component to it. That's why we're choosing the things that we do. So they go through some of those, and then we have real frank conversations of like, well, what are your triggers? What's your wounding from adolescence? What do you need to do to heal it? How can we tell if you're triggered? And what do you need? What help will you need? What's going to help you? So we go around the circle and we talk with each of our mentors. What is that? And take notes. Okay, if such and such, if we see, Tom looking this certain way when this thing has happened, we need to take him aside and go talk to him, or whatever it's going to look like. It's different for each person. But yeah, we call it out because that's one of the most important things. We have a paper of what mentoring is and what mentoring is not, and one of the things a mentor is not is triggered. If a mentor is triggered, then he or she needs to go talk to somebody else and deal with it. So of course during the rite of passage and during our mentorship period, we have meetings just for the mentors, not with the youth, for them to talk through this, because mentorship is a real personal growth path. Yeah. And there was part of the question that you were asking too of like, I think it was kind of like, what is a mentor? Like how do we hold? What is mentoring? So the way that we look at it, the mentor holds the space between friend and parent. The mentor can be friendly and should be friendly, I think, but a mentor is not a chum. It's not a buddy. It's not a friend. The mentor is also not a parent. We don't clean up after them. Okay, the mentor holds a space in between that. That's a confident, competent, authentic adult showing up as they are, who really cares, and who's also willing to listen. The mentor listens mostly, hopefully. The mentor mirrors back what's good about that young person in an authentic and real way, and the mentor also might call out that young person and say, hey, you know something? I don't think that's such a great idea. I would take a good strong look at that. I don't think whatever this thing is that you're getting ready to do, or I think you should check yourself on this idea. Here's what I see. Here's how it may affect you later on. So yeah, it's a new place. Is there another word? Is there another word for it? I don't know, but I like that idea that the mentor is neither friend nor parent, but is really it's a special role in between there that the young person really needs.
Yeah.
Because the parent can't. There's a quote I read recently in Martine Prechtel's book Long Life, Honey and the Heart, where he says something like, no Mayan from their village where they have traditional rites of passage, or where they had traditional rites of passage, no Mayan would think that a parent of a 14-year-old could provide what that 14-year-old needs.
Yeah.
They know they can't.
Yeah. No, it feels, it's that thing of also a child is brought up by the community. There comes a place where the parent is absolutely, just because of who they are, they just cannot be the ones to hear and witness.
Yeah.
They'll come again, the relationship will change, but there is definitely something very magical about that time of young people's lives where they need to seek out. And it's another growth spurt, like in a tree, it creates another branch where it's going to get a different form of nourishment and a different view of the world. So so the mentorship, when you meet monthly,
Sure.
is it literally you're sitting around in a circle? Do you have themes? Do you have other kind of tasks or challenges that you're bringing into that circle? Is it a social event?
Yes. Yeah, it's all of that. I think they pine for more social time than they get. because they're just so happy to be back in connection with each other again and be face to face again. We both have a few themes that we bring, and we source from them too. What are the things we ask them at the beginning of the mentorship period, what are the things that you would like to do with this group? I always find it interesting that with the young men, every year they want to learn about cooking. I'd say that's been the one thing. Is that true? They want to learn about cooking, and they want to talk about relationships and sex. Very important. But yeah, they always want to learn about cooking. It's great. We get together and they learn about knife technique and, how do you put this food and that food together, and how do you make something taste good? How do you deal with freshness, etc., etc. It's great.
Well, it's something in that what they've experienced then is also emanating as sensuality. Food and relationship is a wonderful thing to come out of a rite of passage, because it's opened up the flow of energy in their body. It's a wonderful example of how powerful that experience has been.
Yeah. So we always sit in circle. I mean, almost always. We've done all kinds of things with them. Definitely, like I said, the cooking. One of the things that we've set up since the first year is they wish to speak with an elder woman about relationships and sex. That's been important. Been a very important one each year. Each year we've done that. That's been really, really important.
And they ask questions directly, or do they
Yes.
write it down? Or
we've just had them ask questions directly.
wow, that's amazing. Brave boys.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah. And let's see, what other things? Gosh, there's always some amount of hiking. There's some amount of primitive skills, or what you call bushcraft. I've taken them mushrooming. We've done a little bit of wildcrafting. Just a whole host of things. This year, since we have young men and young women for the first time, we have a couple joint meetings. We've just done our first one last month, and we'll have one coming up in a few more weeks. And that's been really interesting for them to interact with each other, to have counsel together, to learn from each other. And they come together and they have a basic common culture. So that's actually been really, really good. Let's see what else. They help out with our annual fundraiser, so practical service work. What else have we done, or do we have planned? There's never enough time for all the stuff we want to do. We could easily, if we had the time, we could easily meet with them weekly, if not even.
So when you meet monthly, is it for a night or a day? It sounds like
it's a full day. It's a full day.
It's a full day.
Yeah, so it's like 10 to 4, so we get 6 hours. There's never enough time.
No.
In those 6 hours. But they also, during that time, they get to refresh, they get to sit in council, they get to talk about what's going on, they get to refresh the core values, they get to refresh their claiming statement, their I am statement.
It seems very important. The story is keeps forming and being touched upon by regular meetings like that. I really see the worth in that.
Oh yeah.
You mentioned boys and girls, and so I feel like this is the point. I'd really love to bring this question to you, and I'm sure you're recognising this as well in your work, that the question around gender, the question around genderlessness, about perhaps that even having a boy's rites of passage and a girl's rites of passage is a thing of the past, which are theoretical at the moment, discussions happening a lot around this work,
Right.
both from the young people and also adults, maybe even questioning it, and yet also a fierce hold on to the quality and power of having feminine space and masculine space. And so with all of that, and knowing that there's no right or wrong, like where do you feel you're at with that? In terms of, do you feel that there is a place still for a girl's rites of passage and a boy's rites of passage, or do you feel like that is going to be changing?
So there's a couple parts to it. When you ask where am I with that, there is something that's emerging, that I'm just holding the question of like, okay, there's something that's emerging here. So let me share with you what's really important to me. Like, I feel there needs to be a space for something to emerge. However, the vast majority of people, boys get a big shot of testosterone, a second big shot when they get one in utero, they get a second big shot when they're 12. They've got to learn to deal with that. If we don't address the fact that their muscles are stronger pound for pound, if we don't address the things that are going on in their body, if we don't address the fire that's living in their belly and them learn how to do that, they're dangerous. We've got to do that, and they need to do that. They need to do that with men. I feel very strongly about that. They've got to do that with men. Boys, that shot of testosterone and all that changes in their psyche and all that does in their psyche, and who they are and who we are as men, they need challenge. Boys need challenge in a different way. Girls want to be challenged too, but it's in a different way. So I'm a very firm believer in the need for a gendered rite of passage. Absolutely. I really feel like a boy going into manhood age without having addressed his male fire is dangerous. And we can look all across the world, and men are destroying this earth and lighting this earth on fire because they do not know how to deal with their male fire. So I believe very strongly. If there's someone who is really in a different space, an in-between place, some people are born, where their physical body is different, their inner body is different. I think there needs to be a place to address that. But even if it were 10% of people, it's still the lesser amount of people. And in the same way, boys are not giving birth to babies. Women are. And boys are not bleeding every month. Boys, I think, do have a monthly cycle, but it's very different. Men do have a monthly cycle, I would say, but it's very different than what women experience. And women need a place to be with that. They need a place to be with their sisters. They need a place to talk about women's things that I can't understand, and to be with other women who can understand. And there's a deep, deep, deep relaxation. I see when the initiate sisters get together, when the young women, the womenters get together, there's a certain way they relax around each other that they need desperately. In the same way that they need for wholeness. In the same way that there's a way when I get together with the men and I push on them and they can deal with my anger, and they don't get scared. I see that there's a physical reaction that happens often in women, that if a man gets angry, there's a danger goes into that woman's heart, and she is ready for danger. With a man, it doesn't happen that way necessarily. A man gets big and angry, another man understands he has to get this out. So I'm a strong believer in having those gendered places, and then holding space for someone who feels differently. How will that be? If someone comes along to our organization and says, something, I really want to have a space for that non-gendered space. Oh, well, okay, let's see what it takes to grow that. I'm open to that possibility, but I feel very strongly right now, men have got to learn to deal with their male fire before we burn this earth down. Yeah.
And that, I could speak for a lot longer, but one of just the last question then, in terms of that, when we're thinking about initiating young people into another paradigm, another way of being in the world, what are your hopes for that world that we are rising our young to step into? What would be your hopes for the world?
Right now, it's that humans are part of it. So I think we live at a time when we're in danger of extinction. There's a lot of us right now. But it's the megaflora that disappear with the great extinctions, and we're the big megaflora. Or megafauna, excuse me. And that there are some humans that are part of it who remember how to live within the cycles of this really perfect creation. The earth is a perfect functioning being, and somehow we humans at this time, I believe, seem to have forgotten and think that we're somehow separate and distinct, and maybe even have the power of gods to create. And so my hope is that the young people who go through our initiations, who go through the initiatory process, a really meaningful, effective initiatory process, that one of the things that happens is their heart deeply opens up to recognizing that they're part of this earth, and their heart deeply opens up to spirit, to knowing that we're part of creation. And so that's my hope, is that what we're starting now, I hope generations from now, will mean that any young person who comes of age, and when they come of age, that there is a meaningful and effective rite of passage for their heart to open up deeply to nature and deeply to spirit. And they will know how to live. They will know how to live. I don't know what they're going to see, but I do believe that we have to do this part of bringing back meaningful, effective rite of passage. And in the next generations, I hope, will know how to they'll take the talking piece, they'll take the baton, and go places we couldn't dream. But if we can do this, then there's possibility.
Well, thank you very much. It's been an honour and wonderful, and so many more questions I could ask, but I'm honouring our time. Thank you very much.
And you're welcome.